Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we represent clients in multiple business sectors, especially healthcare.
Yep.
This season, we are diving deep into the exhilarating and terrifying process of opening a business. Our theme this season is starting a business.
Yes. And now, Michael, starting a business is just one season of a business. What are the other seasons?
Well, as we've discussed with a little more detail in prior episodes, there are 4 seasons of a business, and we are going to dedicate an entire podcast season to each season of a business. The 4 seasons are the building season, so starting a business, the operating season, the scaling season, and the buying and selling season.
Awesome. Well, today we have a guest who might be the first person outside of you and I who we actually decided to tell him that we're going to start our own firm. So he truly is an OG, played a part in helping us find our home for ByrdAdatto. But before we bring him on, we're just coming off the big game weekend, Michael.
Well, for our audience, Brad's referring to the Super Bowl that was playing in Vegas this past Sunday.
That's correct. I think, Michael, should we discuss the game?
Well, Brad, as much as you and I would like to shift this to a sports talk show, our fans are not here for this content. I use the word fans very generously. Let's stay in our lane and stick with the law.
Fair, but it got me thinking about the Super Bowl and how something can grow from almost nothing to one of the biggest events in the world. And according to Sports Media Watch, Super Bowl ratings date back all the way to the very first game in 1967. Michael, do you know how many people watched the Packers play the Chiefs in the first Super Bowl game?
1 billion.
That's a little high. High there, buddy.
One?
A little more than that. So
okay.
We'll go somewhere in between. It's like the price and right here. But strangely, the very first Super Bowl, which is really interesting, was broadcast simultaneously on both CBS and NBC, and collectively, 51 million people watched it. So you're a little high on the billion. Mm-hmm. But do you know what the lowest rated Super Bowl is? And you can't guess this year because the ratings have not officially been released.
That's easy. That was Saints v. Colts.
Oh, God. You had to go there, huh? That would be incorrect again.
Oh.
So at least you're consistent. That would be Super Bowl III, 1969. Only had a 36.9 rating, which apparently is bad for Super Bowls. And interesting, though, the average number of Super Bowl audience now is over 110 million, so not a billion, Michael, with a lot of people now, tens of millions streaming it. So let's talk about a little bit more Super Bowl talk. Have you actually ever been to a Super Bowl game?
I have not. I really wanted to go the one time it was in Dallas. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
That was the one of the times it snowed in Dallas, and no one knows what to do at that time. So we did not. The tickets were way too expensive considering I had no interest in the participants.
That's true.
How about you?
Well, as you probably know, I did attend when the Saints went, and for those
the Saints went to the Super Bowl?
they did. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And for those who don't know, the Saints actually won it. But believe it or not, that was not my first Super Bowl that I attended.
Oh, you went to that first one in '67?
Ha. I'm not as old as you. No, actually, my first one was in 1981 when the Raiders defeated the Eagles.
Okay, well, why did you go to that game? Because I know you are not a Raiders or an Eagles fan.
This is correct. It happened to be in New Orleans in the Superdome, and my dad got some tickets from a friend, so we went.
Okay, well, fair enough. What does Super Bowl talk have to do with our guest today?
Well, when I was preparing for today's show, I started thinking about today's guest. He was a Division I college quarterback, so I'm sure he would be happy to join us on Football Talk on our new sports podcast, and he could be our first guest.
Well, maybe so, yeah. And we know his son's going to follow in father's footsteps and play football at the next level, so maybe we that's not starting a business, I don't think. Let's just bring him on.
Okay.
So joining us in studio today, and a second-time guest, is our friend, Stephen Holley. Stephen graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 2000. He graduated Basic Underwater Demolition, SEAL Class 234, and served as a Navy SEAL officer at SEAL Team 5 for 5 years and completed 4 deployments to Iraq and Southeast Asia, Following his military service, Stephen continues to be a leader in the Dallas area by co-founding Carry the Load with fellow Navy SEAL Clint Bruce. Stephen and Clint actually joined us on our podcast for a Memorial Day special to discuss Carry the Load. He has been recognized by the Dallas Business Journal through the 40 Under 40 Award and has received the Dallas Foundation's Good Works Under 40 Award. I'm pretty sure neither you or I got either of those,
No,
Brad.
I did not.
And he is the founder of Holley & Company Real Estate. It's a commercial real estate brokerage specializing in office tenant representation in Dallas, Texas. And he's otherwise a really good dude.
This is true.
Stephen, welcome.
Thank you both for having me. Quite the introduction.
Yeah. Well, now that we're having our sports podcast, we have the first, major important question to ask you. Did you ever play in a bowl game for Navy, or did you ever attend a Super Bowl?
I've never attended a Super Bowl. In my freshman year at Navy, again, I was a scout team quarterback that year, but I was on made the travel squad and went to the Aloha Bowl.
Oh, nice.
In Honolulu, and stood on the sideline, but watched Navy beat Cal.
Ah.
And in fact, a very heavily favored Cal team at the time, who was coached by Steve Mariucci.
No way.
Wow. That's really cool.
This is a great sport. We should stick with the sports podcast, or should we go back to why or actually the 5 people that listen to us are here?
We probably should go back to why we're here, but I have so many follow-up questions.
I know. That sounds awesome.
That's really cool. So let's jump in. Let's talk about Holley & Company, Holley & Company Real Estate, and your client base. Talk to us about your business, who you serve, and just give us, our audience, an introduction.
You bet. Holley & Company Real Estate is like you said, a commercial real estate brokerage firm that focuses on office tenant representation. And obviously, I'm lucky enough to have ByrdAdatto as a client of mine, and ByrdAdatto is very indicative of my client base. A lot of law firms, professional service firms here in Dallas, and essentially help companies when it comes to their office leases.
Are they all as demanding as Brad?
Don't answer that question.
Not nearly. But, ByrdAdatto is very indicative, helping folks with their office leases, whether that's an expansion, a contraction, an issue with their landlord, evaluating new options, new buildings, you name it. If it has to do with your office, with your real estate, whether it's a lease or a purchase, it's things that I get involved with.
That's awesome. Well, this season, as you heard, Stephen, we're really focusing on starting a business. And, from a perspective from the commercial real estate side, when one of your clients walks in and says they want to start a business, what would be one of the first questions you would ask them?
What's your tolerance for pain? Your pain threshold. I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's probably the first question that goes through my mind. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble right away, but having started a couple of businesses, having seen both success and business failure personally, and I know we've talked about this collectively in years past, but starting a business is one of the hardest things you can do. It's one of the most rewarding things you can do. But there's a lot of things to think about when you're going down that road. And one thing that I love about what you guys have done is obviously you guys had a professional relationship prior to starting this firm. You had a friendship prior to starting this firm. But one thing in that I envy there is having a partner, because what I tell people is there's nothing like being able to look at someone in the eyes when you're getting your teeth kicked in proverbially, and that always happens. All businesses go through struggles, and so again, that's would probably be my number one piece of advice is who do you have around you that can help you weather those storms that will be there inevitably.
Yeah. And I'm just going to jump back. Was starting a business scarier than the buds training?
Yes.
And why?
Absolutely. The whole SEAL, BUDS training, all of that is, and I had a great friend who went through that training who is now a very successful entrepreneur, having started and sold a number of different companies. One of his pieces of advice very early on was, hey, you can't budge your way through this, meaning you can't just put your head down and physically take it, which you could in BUDS, just don't give up.
Yeah. In
business, it's a little bit different. Being able to solve problems and so yeah, starting a business was a lot tougher because, for me, you don't know. I didn't know what I didn't know, and there was a lot to learn as I went down that road.
And it's kind of relieving to hear because I definitely could not have buds my way through it if that were an option. So
I know I could have done like the first 3 seconds of buds, and then when they're like, "Wait, where's the bell again?"
So I'm curious too. So your role these days in your commercial real estate is, helping people find their space, and yet you have this very real experience being in their shoes. And so does that affect how you talk to them about what their space needs are, for example, when they're looking to start?
Yes, somewhat, because it's all things that I evaluated. Again, I think a lot of the discussion around space needs depends on the type of business.
Right.
Obviously, if you're a professional services firm, your space needs early on and, a year or two into the business are going to be vastly different from someone who's an e-commerce firm who's either manufacturing or storing and distributing a product. So all of those things factor in, but yeah, my personal journey definitely affects the way that I give advice to other people.
And I guess my follow-up question is, you have a client that or a friend that's talking about starting a business. When should they start thinking about the commercial real estate side of things?
They should start thinking about it from day one. But again, going back to the type of business, you can today in today's world, very flexible with what you can do. Again, professional service firm, you can work out of your house. You can go get some co-working space. There's a myriad of options that allow you to scale different services accordingly until you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people around you. So you should think about it from day one and be planning for it with certain, in my opinion, certain business thresholds that you hit from a personnel and a revenue standpoint, things of that nature. But whether you're whether you're going to office from your house or not, you need to be planning for it.
Awesome.
If you're going about it the right way.
Yeah, and that makes me think about those who do say, "Yes, Stephen, I want to go forward. I want to take on this such and such space." When you're advising them, what are you seeing right now in the market as far as this place is going to have to be updated. You're going to need to block out this much time before you can get in there right now.
Yeah, typically in a commercial lease, what most people don't realize is, in having worked for a very large brokerage firm and representing a number of, Fortune 500 companies, those for an office lease and a couple 100,000 feet, or I think the largest I ever worked on was just shy 500,000 feet. But those searches and that process is years. One in particular, I started working on 5 years prior to a lease expiration.
Wow. And
I would tell you the average process, you want to be well in excess of I would say about a year out is the appropriate time, because by the time you start evaluating options, and again, I've done it in as little as 30 days, but the challenge there is the less time you have to go through a legitimate process, the less leverage you have. And so to go through a market process, I'll say, for the average company, that's about a year-long process. That gives you the most amount of leverage to go through the steps, to evaluate your options, and once you pick a horse there, it allows you to go through the proper time for design and build out and all the things that most people don't realize as far as timing and permitting. And you guys are well aware of some of the issues that you can get and the long lead times that you have. And again, you just want to allow for ample time for all of those because, again, the more condensed your time frame is, ultimately less flexibility and leverage.
Yeah, and that makes me think of that 30-day person that had to be a panic monkey of just trying to find just a place to, hang a shingle that day.
Luckily, we were able to thread the needle,
Yeah.
and we found some space, second generation space that had just been built out, and
Then it worked.
it worked.
That's got to be unusual. So, thinking back to like other traps that you see people get into when it comes to the commercial real estate, obviously timing being one of them. What are some other traps that you can think of that when you're starting a business you should be wary of?
Obviously, I think timing's a big one. Understanding the different type of lease structures that are out there. The Dallas office market has traditionally there was a gross. This is going to be scientific to most people, but a gross net of E, lease structure. Today there's a gross net of E and there's triple net lease structures, and all of those have different nuances to them. And I think a lot of people just think about what's my all-in rent number monthly and what's the number and where am I writing a check? But there's a laundry list of issues as it relates to operating expenses and how those are treated and the growth thereof and what you get billed for and your ability to reconcile those and your expansion rights and how you go about negotiating those. And again, the list can go on and on. I don't want to bore anyone to death, but sitting down and at least having an understanding of what those are on the front end, again, just gives you more flexibility down the road.
When it comes to landlords, do you prefer having a landlord that owns their own building versus a landlord that's in a more sophisticated management company?
I typically prefer, the more sophisticated landlord, generally the easier the process, just because of the number of reps that they go through.
Yeah.
And they understand what you're trying to do. I don't know if...
No, that's our experience too, is that a lot of times when it comes to negotiating a lease, the landlords that own their own property fight you on every little nick and they don't understand certain aspects when you're dealing with a more sophisticated. With a more institutional profile. Yes.
Again, their experience tends to be a lot broader, a lot more vast, and they understand the intricacies of that process. And again, there's your building is one asset of probably many, and there aren't a whole lot of personal feelings that come into play there.
Right.
Cool. Well, let's shift. I would love to hear your perspective on the difference between renting a commercial property and buying it.
It again, I think it comes down to the business. It comes down to again, are you carrying inventory? Are you not? It comes down to how you're taxed. All things that a CPA will be able to help you evaluate those decisions. But I would tell you, most companies early on, you would want the flexibility of leasing your real estate so that that allows you to scale quickly, and again, just provides a lot of flexibility. But a lot of companies will get to a point where, whether they've scaled to a certain point, their footprint is a known commodity at that point where, depending on how they're taxed, owning the real estate makes the most sense. It just kind of depends on the company.
Is it easier? And this may be a loaded question, but it popped in my mind. I think you use the word flexibility. If you outgrow your space in a lease situation, is it easier to move and sublease versus, I guess, if you outgrow a space that you own, you're I don't know what your options are.
Yes, I would tell you there's more flexibility in subleasing space, and going elsewhere. Again, it all depends on the space you're trying to sublease, the quality of the space. There's a lot of different factors there, but again, I think a lease, all things being equal, will give you the greatest amount of of flexibility.
Well, our favorite thing to say to people is it depends. So you're speaking our language,
Everything depends.
right?
Yeah. And maybe, you're talking about different type of buildings. And could you give an audience, so someone will say like, oh, I'm going to show you this particular office space and it's an A+, or I'm going to show you this office space and it's an A. What should they be expecting when someone kind of gives them those type of ratings for a building?
Different people in the market will give buildings different ratings and criteria, and what is an A to some people may be a B+ to others. It all depends. That's the magic word here. But generally, in this market, you'll have what people would refer to as AA product. I would tell you that's new product, brand new product that's either coming out of the ground or just coming online in a hot submarket that commands the highest amount of rents. It's also will be the most amenitized. And from a building perspective, construction, it'll have all the latest and greatest systems, and being post-COVID, a lot of those have to do with health and safety and all the things that became talking points that really never were prior to the pandemic.
That doesn't make sense, which I guess kind of, since we're talking about post-COVID, we're 19 months past COVID now and moving into the 2024. What do you see what's going on with the commercial real estate? Is it growing? I mean, work from home, is it, what are you seeing or hearing from others?
It depends.
Michael, you should have never taught him that word.
Oh.
Here's what I will say is, you look at the headlines today and, record amount of sublease space in some markets, people not returning to the office as quickly as everyone anticipated. It all depends on the building. And what I would tell you is what we've seen post-COVID, if I were to give you a blanket statement, is there's been a flight to quality. Good buildings that have good amenities. And again, these are all companies that are, for the most part, competing for workers.
Right.
So those that have great locations that allow great access, great amenities, and a building that allows people to not only recruit and hire but retain talent, those are the ones that are going to win. If you look at, I think a great example is you look at downtown Dallas, in the core of Dallas, some of those, those vintage early 80s and 90s buildings that are, south of Ross Avenue, a couple of blocks. A lot of those conversations today are off what I call office to resi conversion and condos, and how are those ownerships converting those to meet today's demand? So again, I think it comes down to where you are, where you're located, the type of building you're in. But if you're in an older vintage building, you probably have some issues that you're trying to figure out.
Vintage is such a kind word to say that this building is trash, but vintage is nice. Yeah. And so what, someone sitting here listening going, okay, what should I be looking for? So when you say amenities like restaurants and workout facilities and concierge, like that's the kind of stuff that you're seeing in these AA kind of, or these new builds now?
Yes. Restaurants, fitness, proximity to public transit, be it DART, rail, bus service, floor plates that can be, I don't want to say modular, but the ability to flex to a specific company's changing needs, whether that's modular furniture, modular walls, being able to reconfigure space as their business changes. And again, as I think you guys know this, whether generally when you walk into a building to sign a lease, you're looking at least a 5-year commitment, and that's a big time horizon for most folks. So again, the flexibility for that space to grow with you as you mature and your business changes, and maybe you got more people. A law firm's great in the sense that the majority of your folks are looking at probably officing in hardware offices, whereas other companies, might have the majority of their people in open office architecture. So Again, it just goes back to flexibility and meeting a specific company's needs.
Awesome. Well, we, believe it or not, are out of time. We that time flew through. We're so grateful that you joined us today, Stephen. What we'll do next is we'll go into a commercial, and on the other side, we'll make fun of Brad for being vintage. And maybe talk a little legal talk.
Perfect.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, if you don't remember, this season's theme is starting a business. And really, this whole season, we're really camping out on this. And there's a lot of things that happen when you start a business. And today we had a good friend of ours, commercial real estate agent, Stephen Holley, come join us. And he gave some great tidbits, not only about the things to consider when you're starting a business and you know, on the commercial side, but just the in general of being someone who's like he is, who's a serial entrepreneur, starting businesses and the risk associated with that and just in general. But I think both of us, he started talking about different types of contracts and aspects of an agreement that you need to think about. And one of the things he talked about was, you know, you think you're signing a lease and the lease says that this is how much you have to pay per square foot. And you don't realize that there's triple net leasing, which means that that's just a piece of it and that it can go up or down, generally up, based on other expenses and taxes associated with the building. And so what you want to do if you are signing a lease, spend some time understanding what does that cost look like, and then spend more time asking for more information from the landlord. How often did this come out? When does it come out? What are you expecting as far as increases in this triple net? So just spend a little bit more time doing your own due diligence, because once you sign that it's in the contract, you don't realize you could get hit. But there's some other things in contracts you should consider also, Michael, besides just that aspect of a contract.
Yeah, I think all of us think in simple terms when we're thinking about, you know, starting a business and we're thinking about the space we need. And we're like, well, how much space and what's the rent?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of where your brain wants to naturally go. And don't get me wrong, those are really important.
Very.
Having a broker help is so important for some of these nuances that you just mentioned. And it's a lease. It's a legal document. And there are aspects to it that you want to watch out for to protect yourself. So one concept that can show up in a lease is a requirement for a personal guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
And if they ask for that, understand that means that you as the individual entrepreneur are personally guaranteeing that this rent will be paid. So if the business fails and you can't pay the rent every month, they can come after you as an individual. And this varies market by market about whether, you know, you're in a market where everyone signs personal guarantees, or in some markets you don't, and other markets it's kind of in between. And it can depend on your particular negotiating leverage and the how, if you're starting a business, you know, you're more likely to be asked to sign a guarantee. So understanding that, and especially if you have partners
Mm-hmm.
who all has to sign off on that. And then Stephen talked a lot about flexibility, and I'm saying this as a business owner. When you start a business, you don't really know what your future space needs are going to be, and no matter how much you plan, that's going to change. And we're really bad at planning that because we outgrow our 5-year plan in 2 years pretty routinely.
I blame you for that.
Yes, it is.
You need to plan better.
Okay. Well, having flexibility in your lease can become really important. And thankfully, Stephen helped us get that even when we didn't really know how important that would be. And so that might look like an option to take over the space next door. Sometimes you'll hear the term right of first refusal to, if there's some empty space that if someone's about to come in, could have the right to say, no, I'll take it at whatever those terms are. And so there are some important considerations from just negotiating the legal documents that could ultimately pay off down the line.
Yeah, and on that note, that I think is a really important element is if you think you will be in growth mode, not only do you need to ask to negotiate the right of first refusal, see if you can lock in the rates for a certain time frame, that if you do get it within that time frame, the rates are locked. But, Michael, I think that's all the time we have. Any parting words for our audience today?
Well, I was encouraged that you don't have to become, a Navy SEAL to start a business, but also discouraged that was easier than starting a business. But I really loved hearing Stephen's perspective. And, the bottom line is the real estate is going to be one of the biggest overhead items that go into most small businesses' new business. And so you really want to hone in on these issues.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, next Wednesday we have our good friends, Dr. Stephen Camp and Sarah Camp, joining us to discuss them starting a medical practice. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.